Hello people, welcome back to The Struggle, where we dive deep into the most effective ideas, stories, theories and strategies for overcoming life's challenges. The struggle is the process of working through internal or external resistance in pursuit of growth, meaning and freedom. And together we'll figure out how you're restricted and explore how you can struggle to break free and grow through whatever adversity you're facing. This is episode 58, and today we're diving deep into the world of addiction and compulsive or distracting behaviours. Now, I should say right up front, addiction is a spectrum. And so if you don't feel like you're addicted to anything, just remember that the spectrum of addiction ranges from mild distraction from the present or from your emotions all the way to debilitating dependence. So I would argue most people at the very least mildly distract themselves from the present or their emotions with unproductive or unhealthy behaviours or substances. What if I told you... What if every time you harmlessly reached for your phone, you were actually reaching away from connecting with yourself? As I've said many times over the last 57 episodes, the world today, the modern world, is rife with distracting, addictive, compulsive and dopaminergic behaviours and activities, and they're more accessible than ever before. Before you had to get out of bed, get dressed and walk to the shop to buy alcohol, now all it takes is a few clicks on your phone. Before you had to go to a shop and buy pornographic magazines or videos, now all it takes is a few clicks on your phone. Before you had to get up off the couch and turn the TV on and watch the same thing for an hour or so, now all it takes is a few clicks and you are drip-fed hundreds of thousands of novel videos instantly. Our brains haven't changed for tens of thousands of years, so think how different the world is now compared to 30,000 years ago. Our brains evolved in scarcity and are now attempting to function in abundance. This is bound to cause problems. Now, the world of addiction and the word in itself, addiction, sounds strong. Most people would hear the word addiction and say, I'm not addicted to anything. That's for the junkies or the drug addicts or the alcoholics. But if I were to say instead compulsive behaviours or continuous distracting behaviour, you might find that to be more realistic to your circumstances. Compulsive behaviours are repeated actions or behaviours that a person feels driven to perform, often to relieve painful feelings or emotions, even with the knowledge that it's irrational, unnecessary, or harmful. And a continuous distracting behaviour is the persistent use of an external stimuli to avoid being present with one's own thoughts, emotions, or bodily sensations. I would predict that most people use or have used some form of substance or behaviour either compulsively or to distract themselves from pain. This certainly doesn't mean you're addicted to anything, but if you're finding yourself distracting yourself from parts of life or are in a difficult situation, the answer cannot always be distraction. And so this episode will provide you with some tools to prevent relapse for those on the more difficult end of the addiction spectrum, as well as those who just want to stop distracting themselves so much and be a little more proactive. Now, I will say early on, this is not about judging yourself. The strategies and tools I'm about to outline are tools to ultimately better understand yourself, connect with yourself, and take care of yourself. Judgment will only lead to further harm. As the addiction and trauma expert Dr. Gabor Maté says, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Now, the first step, which you have already taken by clicking this video and watching this far, the first step is becoming aware of the problem. You cannot hope to stop harmful or unproductive behaviours if you don't first acknowledge that they're an issue. So you're now aware of the problem. We've acknowledged the problem, so now we need to explore why it's a problem, both from a physical perspective and on a deeper psychological level. So let's start with the physical, and we're going to call this strategy the dopamine audit. Now, I've spoken frequently on the physical aspects of addictive and compulsive behaviours, as well as substances previously on the podcast, and I'll link the relevant episodes in the show notes. But to briefly summarise the neuroscience behind addictive behaviours, I'll be using Dr. Anna Lembke's definition of addiction and addictive behaviours because I find hers the most helpful. Now, I also spoke to Anna in a previous episode of my last podcast, In Context, which I'll also link in the show notes for anyone wanting a deeper dive on dopamine and addiction. And her book, Dopamine Nation, is also extremely useful and helpful, which I'll also link below as well. But for now, Anna defines addiction as the compulsive overconsumption of a substance or behaviour despite negative consequences. Anna uses the image of a pleasure-pain balance to explain this further. Now, one of the key neurotransmitters in the brain is dopamine, which is connected to pleasure, reward, and motivation. When we experience pleasure, the balance tips towards pleasure, of course. However, the balance doesn't just stay tipped towards pleasure, it has to tip back. The brain seeks homeostasis, and so the balance must tip an equal amount back towards pain. Anna helpfully uses the image of gremlins hopping on the pain side of the balance, following the balance tipping towards pleasure. The more pleasurable the activity, the more the gremlins will hop on and tip the balance towards pain. This helps explain why we crave another piece of chocolate after eating a piece of chocolate. We experience the pleasure of eating chocolate followed by the pain that follows, or the balance tipping towards pain, causing us to crave the balance tipping back towards pleasure and eating another piece of chocolate. Now, as I said earlier, our modern world is rife with addictive and highly dopaminergic activities and substances, and so I would define these as the substances and behaviours that tip the balance significantly towards pleasure without much or any effort required. Now, what's crucial to remember here is we can utilise the pleasure-pain balance to our advantage by voluntarily tipping the balance towards pain. Now, I don't mean harm or hurt ourselves, I mean intentionally doing difficult things, because our brains don't know the difference between pain and difficulty, and so when we partake in difficulty or discomfort, we are tipping the balance towards pain. The balance works both ways, and so when we intentionally tip the balance towards pain through effortful or difficult behaviours and activities, the balance will tip towards pleasure afterwards, and that pleasure is likely to be longer lived and will not tip back towards pain. And so the behaviours, substances, and activities that we should be wary of are those that produce dopamine and therefore pleasure without much or any effort required. Drugs, alcohol, social media, pornography, video games, and gambling are classic examples. And the behaviours that we should embrace in a healthy manner are those that tip the balance towards pain through effort or healthy discomfort. Sports, exercise, reading, and writing, to name a few. So there's a super quick and brief summary of the physical side of the issue with highly dopaminergic behaviours. So we've accepted the problem, and we now know the reason that it's a problem from a physical perspective. To decipher why this behaviour or substance is a problem psychologically requires a bit more work, because there's a plethora of psychological reasons why someone might utilise a behaviour or substance to distract themselves or to self-soothe, ranging from past trauma or difficult experiences to avoidance of distress to emotional interoception, to a desire for control or certainty to shame avoidance. So we'll call this step unmet needs and flawed fixes. This step requires some introspection and perhaps some journaling. Now, I should make this clear. I'm not a psychologist. I have a master's in philosophy and a master's in digital society, and I've been researching self-development, addiction, and self-discovery for over 5 years. I've interviewed experts in the field, and I've clocked up over 60 hours of therapy myself, so I have some knowledge and understanding of this. But if you feel like you have unresolved trauma, I would highly recommend speaking to a counsellor, therapist, or watching content from reputable experts in the field to better understand this trauma. Dr. Gabor Maté, Joe Hudson, and Dr. Anna Lembke all spring to mind regarding this, so I'll link some helpful content below pertaining to trauma and resolving trauma. What I can provide is some tools and strategies that I've learned for better understanding why we use compulsive and addictive behaviours and substances. Now, I should also mention the next few sections regarding the psychological component of compulsive behaviour can be quite dense. So feel free to pause to take notes or pause to come back later if you're not in a state to concentrate. So first, we need to return back to when we first used or partook in this behaviour. How old were you? Why did you first use it? What were you experiencing around this time? How did you feel around this time? Did this behaviour provide connection that was lacking in your life? And next, we need to identify the feeling you were trying to get away from. What state were you trying to relieve? What were you avoiding by partaking in this behaviour? What emotion or state are you trying to relieve now by partaking in this behaviour? Are there any common factors that determine when you will partake in this behaviour, whether that be environmental, emotional, or are there certain triggers that cause this behaviour? As well as this, we can identify how we feel following the behaviour, both mentally and physically. How long does the relief of the behaviour last before pain sets in again? And what are the long-term consequences or trade-offs of continually partaking in this behaviour? This draws both on Anna Lembke's work of locating the neurochemical role, becoming more aware of the cost of our behaviours, mapping triggers, the dopamine deficit state that drives further consumption, as well as addiction and trauma expert Dr. Gabor Maté's approach of not questioning why the addiction, but why the pain, and investigating what the addiction or compulsive behaviour does for you, rather than the problems it causes. And further questions to ask regarding Maté's work are: what pain might the behaviour be helping me avoid? Is this pain similar to the pain I felt in the past? As well as this, we can identify the unmet need we are trying to fulfill in a flawed manner, because it's likely we developed this cycle of compulsive behaviour when we didn't know any better, and so we created this flawed way of trying to meet an unmet need, but of course it never could possibly truly fulfill this unmet need. That instead requires healthy and sustainable practices, self-compassionate inquiry, and connection with others. All of this reveals the emotional pain or trauma the behaviour is imperfectly trying to heal, and the unmet need we are imperfectly trying to fulfill. Now, we can always use executive coach Joe Hudson's approach to fully experience the pain or emotion that we have been trying to avoid. Ask yourself, what identity or story am I reinforcing with this pattern? Stories like, I can't feel shame, or I'm not worth bettering myself for. Hudson likens the avoidance of painful emotions as a result of a painful emotion becoming stuck within us from the moment we first avoided the emotion up until now. And so by truly feeling it and becoming curious about it, we can release it from ourselves and free ourselves from it. Ask yourself, if I could feel this emotion fully without resistance, what might happen? Now, Joe Hudson also advocates for tracking the somatic experience of urges. So before you react to an urge to consume or partake in a given behaviour, ask yourself, where in my body do I feel this urge? And what happens in my body if I were to pause and sit with this sensation? This step of identifying and exploring the psychological reasons why we have developed this issue will likely take some time and introspection. But if you come at these questions and your experiences with genuine curiosity and without judgment, you will uncover why you developed this issue, what it does for you, and it will inform you for the next step, which is reconnecting with yourself and becoming emotionally aware. So the next strategy is building space. Because we need to create space between the urge and the behaviour. So first, try pausing when you feel the urge, even just for 10 seconds. 10 seconds is enough to ask yourself without judgment, what am I feeling right now? Or what feeling am I trying to avoid? With practice, the more you pause, the more time you'll be able to ask further questions about your experience. Questions like, what was missing from my life when I first partook in this behaviour? What is this behaviour trying to give me? Is it relief, love, connection? Put your hand on your heart and try your hardest to feel compassion towards yourself like you would a loved one. Eventually, you'll have time to explore healthier ways to meet this unmet need, but for now, we just want to create space. In this pause, we can also scan our bodies from head to toe, asking where is there tension, numbness, heat, or tightness. Take some deep breaths with long exhales and check in with your breathing. Is it tight, shallow, deep? Say to yourself, I am in my body and I am safe to feel. This draws on addiction expert Ryan Soave's work. Start with as little as 10 seconds of space, and build up to 3 minutes. If you relapse or still partake in the behaviour, that's fine. Your goal here is to simply create space between the urge and behaviour. It will take time to relinquish the behaviour itself fully. Another practice worth exploring, which is something to practice every morning rather than specifically around the time of an urge, is what Joe Hudson would call an emotional weather forecast or an emotional weather report. It's aimed at identifying emotions now and predicting emotions throughout the day based on what you have planned. So every morning, ask yourself, what emotions are present in me today? What emotions am I avoiding, if any? And what emotions do I predict will arise today? What might cause them? Write down, I predict I will feel this when this happens. Fill that in. You'll be better prepared for when this emotionally charged event occurs in the day. Now, I should mention the app, How We Feel, which I'll link in the show notes, is very useful for those who struggle with identifying emotions. But this is all about preparing emotionally for the day ahead so you're not blindsided by difficult emotions later, causing unconscious reactions. Another way to emotionally prepare for the day ahead is to build compassionate connection with yourself. Simply answering the question, what part of me needs compassion today? Or how would I speak to myself if I were my own best friend? If you can ask these questions at the start of the day, it can have a profound effect on how you speak to yourself throughout that day. But you have to actually treat yourself with compassion or stop yourself when you start belittling or punishing yourself. You don't need to escape yourself to be okay and safe. I realize that's easier said than done, but if we can continue that practice of speaking to ourselves in a compassionate way, we will eventually naturally be more self-compassionate. Now, the last piece of advice I'll give is to stop counting the days you refrain from a particular behaviour. Counting the days insinuates that this is a linear journey in which days turn into weeks and weeks turn into months. It doesn't work like this, especially when you first start or try to stop utilising a specific behaviour unhealthily. Now, it might eventually work like that. Days might turn into weeks and weeks might turn into months, but this is not a linear process. The progress is not always in the number of days in a row, but in the connection you build with yourself. The more you connect deeply with yourself and your inner landscape, the more you'll be able to make better informed decisions. This is not a case of simply stopping the behaviour and that's it, game completed. This is about building compassion and connection with yourself. There will be days when you slip up or when you fall back into old habits unconsciously. But if you can look at those slip-ups with honesty, clarity and curiosity and not judgment, you will progress forward. That's still progress towards a clearer picture surrounding your behaviour. Each slip-up is growth, but only if you allow it to be. Growth does not come from lambasting yourself for failing. So ultimately the choice is yours when you fall. Learn from it and grow from it, or punish yourself and stay exactly where you are. And so there you have it. That's a toolkit for reconnecting with yourself and for overcoming compulsive or highly dopaminergic behaviours. Now, I know that was a lot, so feel free to go back and listen again, as it was quite dense. It was quite a dense episode. And to be clear, again, this isn't a prescription. I am not an expert, and while these tools have been proven to help those struggling with this, they might not be helpful for you. This is an individual journey, and what works for some people might not work for others. But I have found these tools very helpful for understanding my inner landscape and for understanding how I behave and act throughout the day. Some might prove to be useful to you, and some may not. Take from this what helps and bin the rest. And remember that you don't have to have it all figured out. This is an ongoing process of connection, clarity, and curiosity. That's just what life is. Better understanding ourselves and being more compassionate to ourselves is a journey, an ongoing process that we have to manage and practice. Now, what I will say, though, is if you're still struggling or feel like you need deeper help, I can't recommend the help of a good therapist more. Therapists have the potential to see you clearer than you see yourself, and that can only be a good thing. Remember, struggling isn't a sign that you're failing, it's a sign that you're trying. And if you're trying, you're still in this fight. The answer lies in the struggle. So keep on struggling. Hi guys, I've just got a wee bit of housekeeping before you take off. Firstly, thank you so much for watching. It genuinely means a lot to see people watching and liking the content. Second, if you're enjoying the content, please subscribe to the channel. That's the absolute best way you can support the podcast. As you can probably tell, I don't have a team behind me helping with recording or editing the podcast, and I don't have a lot of fancy equipment, so any help or support is greatly appreciated because it will help the podcast grow and get better. And finally, keep on struggling.